What the f is private equity? How do they make money? Who gets to invest in this stuff? And do they really own everything? I'll answer these questions in a minute, but to give you context on how influential private equity really is, consider this. The top 10 PE firms manage $4.68 trillion in total. If they were a country, they would be the third richest in the world, beating Germany by a mere $21 billion. And at the end of this video, I'm going to tell you why even the SEC is afraid to go after them. But what do they do really? The basic playbook in all PE deals has 4 to-dos. Number 1. Buy into private or public companies and then take them private, where the name private equity comes from. Number 2. Improve or scale. Number 3. Sell. And number 4, also the most important, pocket the spread plus fees. Wait for this one because you'll be shocked at how they do this and why they pay less taxes than you even though they make tens of billions collectively. So how do they buy a company? The most common example is a leveraged buyout. Leverage stands for taking on a ton of debt to buy a company while putting as little as 20% of their own money. But the catch is that the PE firms load the debt on the company's books, not on theirs, so that even if the company goes bankrupt, the PE firm walks away without paying anything. In 2005, KKR, Bain Capital and Vornado Realty Trust bought out Toysrus for $6.6 billion in an LBO. They put up $1.3 billion of their own money and borrowed the rest. But this debt was recorded on Toysrus's books and not theirs. So technically the company owed the creditors money and not the PE firms. They pledged the company's assets and future cash flows as collateral. Basically they own all the upside and very little of the downsides. So how do they really improve a company? Raise prices, cut costs, or a complete turnaround? Well, a mixture of everything. Red Lobster had to lay off more than 300 employees to cut costs without any notice. Why? Because Golden Gate Capital, a PE firm, bought out the company and sold all of its real estate and then leased back to them. So they now had to pay rent every month on the land that they owned a couple of months ago, adding to their fixed costs. The result? Red Lobster had to ultimately file for bankruptcy. Another example is the buyout of Dunkin' Donuts. Bain Capital, Carlyle Group and Thomas H. Lee Partners bought out Dunkin' Donuts and Baskin-Robbins by paying $2.4 billion in cash. The Dunkin' brand had been struggling in the early 2000s due to declining sales, operational inefficiencies and lack of strategic direction. So the new owners improved the quality of coffee, introduced new flavors and invested in better marketing campaigns. The company also launched an extensive digital transformation, including the introduction of a mobile ordering app and a loyalty rewards program for customer engagement. And within a few years, Dunkin' did a 180 by raising over $400 million in its IPO. Which brings us to, who do they sell these companies to? Well, to other PE firms or companies after they squeeze out their fees and profits or want to minimize their losses. Dunkin' was sold to Inspire Brands, a fast food restaurant franchise company in 2020. And on to number 4, how do they pocket the spread plus fees? Stay until the last one because it is legit evil. Remember how they paid $2.4 billion in cash for Dunkin'? Well, they cashed out at approximately 5x their investment at $11.3 billion in 2020. But this only happens when they do make a profit. What about the times when deals aren't so juicy? PE firms charge their investors a 2% management fees, which is typically a fee for just existing. So when Blackstone says it manages $1.13 trillion, it makes around $22 billion in management fees alone. On top of this, they charge a performance fee, which is typically around 20% of the profits. But as good as it sounds, it comes with a watermark, which means the firm has to make a certain percentage of profit before they get to eat into the remains. A typical watermark is around 8%. So hypothetically, if Blackstone's assets go up by 9% in a year, which means they would make $101 billion. Now, they are entitled to 20% of the profits above the 8%, which after some math comes out to $2.2 billion. The cherry on top, they pay less taxes on these billions than you do. Why? Because they're considered capital gains and not income. And capital gains are taxed way less than incomes in the United States, almost half as much. And finally, dividend recaps. Remember how they load the company they're acquiring with debt which they don't personally have to pay back? They also just pay themselves from that borrowed cash and call it a dividend. On top of all this, they charge the company transaction and monitoring fees even if they weren't bought out willingly. Straight up evil. But who gets to invest in this stuff? Well, if you're an average Joe, you definitely don't get to invest. University endowments, rich people who understand finance, pension funds and trust funds. Yeah, families that have been swimming in money before your granddaddy was even born. And do they really own everything? Yeah, pretty much. Here's Dan Toomey from Good Work listing everywhere PE firms wet their beaks.
Subway, Barnes & Noble, 1/3 of Europe's soccer teams, a Formula One team, California Pizza Kitchen, Hooters, Adweek, Neiman Marcus, FanDuel, Highways in India, the music of Taylor Swift, hospital emergency rooms, PacSun, gastroenterology clinics, and even Oatly.
Oh, and here's why the SEC doesn't prefer to go after them. It's simply because they are too powerful. PE firms started lobbying against the SEC and sued them. Why? Because the SEC started regulating private investments across the country. And the SEC doesn't go after them because the PE firms have way better lawyers. As the Gen Alpha saith, that are we cooked?